My name is David Surman. I'm a painter based in South London, and I've recently opened my second solo exhibition at Simsmith Gallery in Camberwell, and the title of the exhibition is Fairy Painting. There's an interesting story, and it has to do with Isambard Kingdom Brunel, who was one of the key architects of the Industrial Revolution in England. When he would go home after a day's work and would sit for his evening meal in his dining room, on the wall of his dining room, he would have a painting by Edmund Landseer, a painting which showed a scene from Midsummer Night's Dream, the Shakespeare play. And that painting was considered part of a genre called fairy painting. And fairy painting was a popular genre. It was paintings done in a kind of hyper-natural, realist mode, which showed fairies and nymphs and goblins and creatures in amongst a kind of natural setting. And so Brunel would sit and eat his meal and look at this painting. And in the general discussion of fairy painting, the point that is often made is that it was an excuse for stuffy Victorians to make paintings of nubile bodies. It was a way to kind of insert an erotic element into painting that could exist in people's homes. But and while I don't deny that, the thing that interests me is that it's a form of nature painting. It's a form of metaphysical, supernatural, strange painting that was in stark contrast to the changing world of the Industrial Revolution, while the countryside was slowly turned over and became the landscape we know today. The architects of that change, people like Brunel, would look at this kind of painting. And so the title of my exhibition, Fairy Painting, refers to that particular moment based on my interest in depicting nature. The other meaning, which I'm interested in, has to do with myself as a queer painter, fairy painting being a kind of slang or a shorthand to refer to queer painting. And I think that that's incredibly important to me to kind of capture in the title of the exhibition, because to make images of nature, to make images that have a kind of ecological focus is inextricably linked to being a queer person. The experiences of queer people and the depredations of nature and so on are part of the same struggle. And so in my work, when I depict nature in various states, it's always a kind of self-portrait. I can't really say that the paintings come from any one particular source. I don't have a process that involves me going to, a source material and then translating it. I don't have a method where I use photographs or anything like that. Paintings come into my imagination from my unconscious, really. I dream them or they suddenly hit me. They always hit me as compositions primarily. Some element dominates the picture, and I imagine how it might sit within the rectangle. And with all of the paintings in this exhibition, they all came to me that way. They all lingered at the edge of my mind, saying, hey, can we come now? Is it time? And one of the interesting things about lockdown and the experience of the past 18 months is my receptivity to paintings has gone up. Paintings have come and I've been ready to really capture them. I haven't been so concerned with a more high-minded intellectual process of editing ideas as they come. I've just allowed them to happen. And so the overall effect is that the works in the exhibition have an instinctual quality. They feel raw. They feel somewhat unprocessed. They're not in the domain of the intellect. They operate within some lower register. And when it came to mixing colour and even laying down marks, I found that where I was going with colour, where I was going with the brush marks had changed as well. For these works, the palette has become more complicated. It's become darker, more tertiary colours, mauves and strange coppery colours, and also interesting combinations of monochromes together, which surprised me. I think sometimes people have a preconception that a painter, has an idea for a painting and then they just simply execute it. But for me, the idea is a general one at the very beginning, and you begin to commit the first few gestures towards the idea, and that then is subject to change. You mix a colour and you lay it down, and then suddenly all subsequent choices on the canvas are changed because you're having the real experience of what you've done measured up against your imagined idea of what the painting would be. And so I can't really say that the work it follows any particular pattern. Some works move relatively uninterrupted from the mind to the canvas. Other works go through this process of change and transformation and so on. It's always different. In the case of this show, the works were executed quickly because we have all become a great deal closer to our minds. We've all, over the course of the last 18 months, had ourselves for company that much more. And so I felt like I had a stronger link, more bandwidth with myself. And so the work came strongly and quickly, and I responded to that in how I've executed the work. I think an important thing to emphasize in the combination of the watercolors with the larger gestural paintings is, again, that I'm interested in calling into question the notion that an artist puts forward a singular reality. I think we all nowadays live in multiple realities: who we are with our family, who we are at work, who we are on social media. And as an artist, because art is so influenced by notions of truth, authenticity, and so on in the output of the artist, temperament, sometimes we assume that an artist should only do one thing. I think by putting together things like watercolors, which are executed in a very different way, with the larger paintings, you set up multiple realities, and it relates to the theme that is present in those watercolors. They show Neolithic primal scenes of shamanic figures going through some strange kind of unknown ritual. I'm open to the idea that perhaps it's the ancient past, perhaps it's the far future, who knows? But in either case, it has to do with multiple realities. The caveman or cave woman has the wall on which the work is shown, or the intoxicated vision that they experience. in contrast to their everyday reality. And so in fairy painting, I'm setting up these multiple realities. At a formal level, that comes through in the painting as well. In the larger works, several of them have 3 distinct levels of process. I spray a background which sets up a volume or a space. It has a thick atmosphere. And then onto that I do a gestural painting with a large brush with large kinetic marks. And then finally, in some cases, I've gone over with a finer mark which has the appearance of embroidery or hatching or something like that. And those 3 distinct layers, almost like printmaking layers, sit together to make up the painting. And they have a very readable and intelligible separateness, but they also coalesce to become the painting. I haven't tried to kind of pull any tricks and kind of layer the elements together. They sit quite separately because I'm interested in emphasizing the constructed nature of the multiple realities of painting. I think the thing that the pandemic and lockdown experience has exposed is that human beings remain creatures of instinct. We remain creatures of habit. Our unconscious drives shape the bulk of our day-to-day experiences. Some small part of us says, no, you should do this or you should do that. But really, how we eat, how we sleep, how we approach large problems comes from some deep well of habituated behavior. And so when I came to making paintings in this period, and in some respects about this period, I was thinking about myself, and I'm no different from anyone else. And so in thinking about myself, I was thinking about all of us, really. And I was thinking the unconscious is really the engine, and human consciousness, which has accomplished so much, still remains profoundly animalistic, still remains profoundly instinctual. The way humans respond to fear, the way humans respond to events which exceed a scale that can be easily comprehended, made me think about the structure of the unconscious. And so the paintings that I've made, which have come to me instinctually, often from dreams, often as a processing of things that I've read and researched and so on, that don't immediately have an obvious connection. The paintings are, I believe that they're statements on this that you couldn't easily immediately connect. The paintings are like puzzles or artifacts which have arrived as a consequence of our collective experience of the past 18 months. Paintings of, a house, a fish, a sleeping figure, tortoises. It doesn't logically point to COVID and to the pandemic, but my hope is that with some prolonged looking at the painting, they transmit the atmosphere that we've all experienced. I've always had an interest in the ancient, the human activity going back thousands of years. I'm interested in how people made things, how they thought, how they organized themselves. I'm really interested in that relationship between humans and animals, domestication, that moment at which the human takes of nature in a more complex way. It doesn't simply just consume, it does this other thing. It works with the intellect of the animal to expand its own intellect. The human consciousness extends to animal consciousness. And I'm interested in the way in which ancient art seems to represent that. There's this feeling when an animal is shown in a Middle Bronze Age piece of ornamentation or a Neolithic cave painting, that the artist, that they were contemplating the thing, revering it, objectifying it, capturing its sacred quality, but also being profoundly curious about its potential. You know, what can we do with this thing which is in our lives? And I think for me, I'm a person that is always looking in a questioning way at contemporary life, wondering how we ended up here, wondering how we ended up in this particular contingency of economic, social, and political forces. Why not something else, just slightly different over here or over here? And contemplating the ancient, thinking about origins, is also part of my process of thinking about the highly contingent nature of any given present moment, that other possible futures are always there. And so I've depicted creatures in this exhibition with a cave painting-like quality. And I've shown in the watercolors these more narrative scenes of shamanic Neolithic figures to point to the ancient past, but also to allude to possible futures. You know, if the human being does not sufficiently develop itself in order to avert climate catastrophe, then it's very feasible that the remaining people within the population experience a technological crash and return to some state that resembles Neolithic man. Who knows? You know, the future and the past are not so far apart. And this also relates to an additional point that has to do with art history. Art, painting, sculpture, and so on, they do not function in historical time. When you see a painting, it achieves its effect. Of course, the context is different. The feelings I feel looking at a Turner are not the same as someone who was living in Turner's day, but nonetheless, the painting has its effect. The same is true of cave painting or of artifacts from the Bronze Age. And this means for me that art history is not a linear thing. It's a non-linear, networked reality of images. And so when I use the cave painting, it's not because I want to make any particular archaeological point. It's simply raw material for me as an artist. But what it does point to is a temporality that I would think of as deep time. I think human consciousness is tailored to operate in two different modes. I think one I would call the anxious mode, the anxious mind, which is the ever-present, like, what's happening, the reacting mind, the world of distractions which contemporary technology appeals to so powerfully. The other is the deep mind, the mind of the past, the fact that we can consciously register time going back over many decades of our own lived experience, but then also we can look at the world and hypothesize the experience going back beyond our lifetime. It's such a powerfully, uniquely human ability to do that. And these two minds are always there, and painting operates in those two modes, the anxious details and the deep characteristics. And it's been productive for me to think about these questions when I've been making works for the exhibition. Trees are a very powerful thing for me. They are metonymic of the climate crisis. We endlessly talk about planting trees. They seem to be the thing that is consistently invoked in any conversation about ecology, sustainability, and so on. Trees of various types are also integral to human history. Trees that grow straight enough and tall enough that the timber provides what we need for ships, for masts, for decks, and so on. At the same time, the tree is part of our archetypal collective unconscious. It's the symbol of nature, the symbol of the old, the symbol of the thing that was there before you were born and will be there after you've died. And so depicting trees in painting, you are doing something interesting. You're invoking a body, just like an animal body or a human body, but everybody knows that it's a body that lives in time differently. It exists in time differently. We know that trees move, but we can't, with our own naked eye, see them move, other than if they're blown by the wind. We know that they grow, but we can't watch them grow, other than in deep time. We know that they communicate now through the myceli mushroom network in the root system that we didn't know previously, but we can't observe that or really yet understand what the nature of the communication is. And so the tree is a kind of mystery. At the same time, the tree is radical vulnerability. If we saw one of its branches off, it can't do anything about it. It represents the radically passive state of nature, which is subject to our aggression, subject to our consumption. That relationship between active and passive, masculine and feminine, the aggressor and the defender, these deeply structural characteristics are something which I'm constantly looking to call into question, but also point to the way in which they structure our reality. In the exhibition, I've shown trees, for the most part, in a ominous and broken down and vulnerable state. One of the paintings that I've made in the show is called Animal House, after Jan Bruegel the Elder. And the inspiration and idea for the work came from looking over many years, from childhood really, looking at Jan Bruegel's painting of the Adoration of the Kings. And it's an interesting painting that the studio of Bruegel made many times. It was a popular painting. And it shows a house, the stable in which the Holy Family, in their kind of flight, stay for the night. It's shown as a Northern European stable block. The house is falling apart. It's coming apart. And yet it can provide protection. It provides one more night's protection. Looking at the painting, you see birds and creatures living in the attic space of the building. And you get this feeling that Bruegel is not really interested in the religious subject matter so much as the house, the stable itself, the strange dignity of this thing that's been constructed. And I'm interested in the way in which it looks as if the nearby trees have been cut down to make this building, and that the building is now shown in a moment just before it goes back to nature, just before it collapses and decomposes and returns to the soil. And so the tree for me is a hopeful thing that can also appear tremendously tragic. It lives in a different time frame to us, and yet is completely vulnerable to our claim of it and our transformation of it into man-made culture. At some point in 2020, the Brazilian government decided to put the maned wolf, which is a kind of canine that lives in the Amazon and in the savannas of Brazil. They decided to put the image of that animal on the 200 real bill. At the same time, in the wild, there are only 2,000 of these creatures left. And they are extremely endangered, and the habitats that they inhabit are under threat as a direct result of the policies of the government and the actions of landowners and so on. And this interested me because it points to the paradoxical nature of how human beings deal with reality. We seem very comfortable with holding onto the symbolic aspect of reality, while often quite willing to relinquish the real, material reality to which it refers to. And it seems that this is only intensified as our society has become more technological, it's become more abstracted from nature, that the alienation and the distance from nature has grown and grown over time. And so we are now in this strange moment in which the Bolsonaro government enshrines the maned wolf on currency while ultimately decides its fate in the logging of its habitats. In response to this, I made a painting. The painting is called Raw Bark in the Understory. The title comes from the strange sound that the maned wolf makes. It has this combination of a lion's roar and a dog's bark, which biologists have referred to as the raw bark. And the understory is the level of the forest in which it lives beneath the canopy. I made this painting on a large scale in a strong yellow paint on top of a sprayed dark purple background. And in the painting, I deliberately invoke the idea of Romulus and Remus. I put a baby beneath the she-wolf's legs. And whereas in the ancient Roman sculptures of Romulus and Remus, the babies can easily get to the mother. Because the maned wolf has these peculiar long legs, the baby is, the relationship between the baby and the mother is not an easy one. And there's a kind of ambiguous tension that runs through the painting. And with that painting, I think I'm pointing to something of the connection between myth, our political reality, our collective unconscious, and how those things work together. I think that painting is in a unique position to act as a receiver for multiple realities, multiple points of reference, and to distill them together in some kind of singular image. And so with Rohrbark in the understory, I've tried to do that. And all of the work in the show, I feel, has been a result of, in my own mind, the coming together of my own impulses and desires with information about the world, political information, environmental information, my own research, and then what happens in the studio.